Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third session on day one of Andy South Asia convening. We will get started in a couple of minutes. Please, request for some patience as we have more folks join us. Thank you. Just one more minute and then we can begin. Thank you once again to those who've been joining us from 2 p.m. today for the other two sessions as well. It's been truly great to have you as our audience. All right, and with that, I am going to jump in, just confirming if you can still hear me. Great, thanks for the double thumbs up, Divyani. All right, so we're going to get started on the panel discussion for today, where we're going to be discussing in more detail circular textiles innovations from the ground. I have a stellar panel lineup that I am very pleased to welcome to this particular conversation. We have Gigi Matthews, who is the country director of NVU for India. I'm joined by Mumit Hassan, who is the program representative for an organization called Reverse Resources. And I also have Devyani Hari, who heads the circular economy work for Center for Responsible Business in India. And I've deliberately kept these introductions short because I do believe these panelists are going to be speaking in more detail about the wonderful work that they're doing, and they can do more justice to their work on this particular topic than I ever can. So with that, just to give a bit of a primer, so to say, on what is this topic that we're going to be discussing, because we do realize that the audience that we have in the room is coming from different backgrounds, different organizations, different understandings of circular economy. So what is the circular economy? This is something that is based on three principles, and like the name suggests, is driven by the need to eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials at their highest value, and regenerate nature. So how can we minimize the waste that is being produced across different value chains? This conversation, we will be focusing on textile as one aspect, but circular economy is, of course, much larger than that. So basically, the concept is underpinned by that transition to renewable energy and materials. Some parts of it that we've already touched upon in the previous discussion, where we talked about, net zero transitions, etc. circular economy tries to separate economic activity from the consumption of finite resources. I think the world that we're living in, the resources that we have at hand are finite, as we've been reminded multiple times. So given the kind of climate crisis that we're all facing, I think now is the time that we need to start having these conversations and moving beyond conversation into action. And that's precisely the light that I want these esteemed panelists to shed in terms of the work that they're doing. The circular economy is a resilient system that is good for business, people, and of course, the environment. Very briefly, I think, what does that sort of cycle for the circular economy look like? Just an image that tries to capture aspects of this. And, we'd be happy to share these resources and more links that can help you understand the circular economy in more detail in our follow-up emails as well. But with that, I would like to jump in. So I'm going to stop sharing and just request if I could have Ananya, if you could just spotlight the speakers so that it's easier for the attendees as well, please. With that, I'm going to jump in. And Devyani, I think my first question is to you. And as you introduce yourself and the work that C4RB does, what does circular economy mean in the context of the work that you're doing in India specifically?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saipriya. Good evening, everyone, and good evening, fellow panelists. First of all, thank you for this lovely opportunity. And I think fantastic keeping to time. So I really appreciate that. And I think, Saipriya, you set a very good context. I think you captured it, that a sense that circular economy is decoupling, our resource consumption from our economic growth, we decouple from the resource consumption. And it really is not entirely new for us. I think traditionally all the participants are from economies, are from countries which traditionally had a lot of practices of circular economy, right? So, but it is revisiting what it means in today's context. So just taking a step back, a minute or two just about my organization. So I work for an organization called Center for Responsible Business. We are a think tank which works on issues of sustainability. And the context in which we looked at circularity, right now, this is a conversation that has been gaining a lot of momentum, especially in the apparel and textile sector. It started more as a discussion around waste management and how do you look at the post-consumption waste. And we realized that there was a need, to have a very emerging economy focus, right? We are both a manufacturing and a consuming economy. So what does it really mean for us? It cannot just be about managing the waste. Yes, the waste management, waste reduction is a very important point. But how do you look at the whole issue of how do you produce, right? And that is such a big chunk. So for us, it was also important to sort of develop a framework that we look at the value chain of apparels and textiles and understand that what are the various aspects when it comes to circularity. And I think one of the things that we need to understand that circularity really starts at the design stage itself. It starts very early in the value chain. And it cuts across what materials you are using, what sort of energy sources you use, what is your water consumption, how do you treat your wastewater, the chemicals that go in, what are some of the business models around circularity, right, which say that I can upcycle my waste, I can use my waste, I can look at alternate materials, how do I manage my waste? So those are some of the things when it comes to circularity that is very important for us. So I think it's important for us to say that, one, we look at a more holistic perspective than just managing waste. Circular economy is a vast topic. It is a lot of opportunity for growth. It is a lot of opportunity for resource efficiency. It is a lot of opportunity for livelihoods, new employment opportunities, reviving repair, increasing the longevity of products, right? And what we are seeing on the ground here is that stakeholders have started seeing the value. Brands were driving this conversation in their supply chains, but tier one suppliers have started taking a lot more initiative. There is a lot of value they look at. And our focus also is that how do we also support this with the ecosystem, and how do we also look at policies that can align and support circularity. I think we'll touch upon this a bit later. For example, if we say recycling is good, we need to understand that do we have the right ecosystem? Do we have the right technologies? Do we have acceptance by the consumer to use recycled product? Do we have a standard or measurement to say that this is a good quality product that we can use, right? So all those kind of aspects. And when we look at circularity, when we look at growth, I think it's important to look at how we are addressing our environmental footprint, but at the same time also look at just transition. Any kind of movement, there are times when, for example, cotton is a widely debated material now. Now it's a material that we've traditionally been using the most. I think we will still continue to use the most. But if we look at the water footprint, if we look at the chemical footprint of cotton, it is fairly high. And if we are looking to transition out of cotton or more into organic cotton, what does it mean for just transition? How do we skill the farmers? How do we skill the value chain? How do we ensure that everybody moves? So those are some of the issues that we look at when we look at circular opportunities in the apparel and textile sector. Like you said, there are many sectors that can benefit from circularity, and increasingly, at least if we look from the Indian government's perspective, there is a draft resource efficiency policy. Individual sectoral ministries have started looking at how circularity can be looked at. I know that the Ministry of Textiles actually drafted a circular electronics policy and had shared it with the stakeholders a year or so back. The Ministry of Textiles is looking to engage more with stakeholders, understand what is a more resource efficient growth. There are also international regulations that are going to have implications for suppliers in emerging economies. And as they move towards more circular, more resource efficient value chains, it will have a clear implication for the suppliers here. So I've sort of mixed a little on what we feel are the drivers, but also what are the considerations that we need to have for circular economy when it comes to stakeholders in emerging economies. So with that, I mean, there's a lot more that can be covered, but I think I'm going to stop here and hand it over to other panelists. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Devyani. And yes, definitely a lot of follow-up questions that do come to mind, but I would pause and, pose the same question to the other panelists that we have joining. So Mumit, if you could jump in, would be great to hear in terms of moving into that subset of circular economy, which is circular textiles, like Devyani mentioned. Walk us through a little bit of what you do at Rivers Resources in Bangladesh, please.
Thank you so much, Cypriya, and thanks so much for having me in this lovely session. So just to give a little bit of background about my organization, I work for a company called Rivers Resources. Our organization is it's a software as a service platform that is trying to redefine waste as a form of resource. So the very idea of considering textile waste, a byproduct that is produced with regular production, to change the viewpoint of that to be considered as more of a resource rather than a waste. And the first step that we have recognized can be taken to improve it is by tracing it properly from the factories to the recyclers, so that the supply chain can be transparent, so that much more work can be done in how to make it more seamless and how to basically facilitate the recyclers, the brands, and the factories, whoever so is participating in this supply chain. So primarily our work, of course, as we are a software as a service platform, we have an online platform that can be used for tracing textile waste. We also work a lot in the sector for improving the regular waste management practices in different factories. So there are, currently in most factories and textile industry, the waste is not, the textile waste is not treated or in a particular way, it is not segregated. That would be most beneficial for the recyclers to effectively recycle it. So we do provide a lot of on-the-ground training and support to the factories based on different work with recyclers and brands altogether, so that they can basically improve their waste segregation facilities that would, in the end, improve the quality of the recycled materials as a whole. We do also provide a lot of insight. As I said earlier, that transparency and traceability is a big deal. If I go a bit back of how Rivers Resources was founded, our founder, Ms. Anne Runnell, she was traveling to Bangladesh and she found that there is a lot of textile industries producing a lot of textile waste, but it kind of stops, right? So it is produced and it just vanishes into thin air, and it again reappears at the recycler end as a feedstock. So what happens in between? How much waste a factory is producing, where it is going? Is it actually being recycled? Is it being incinerated, or is it being landfilled? All these questions are left unanswered in most cases. So that's the reason why, and these are the questions that Rivers Resources is trying to answer. And we are Of course, this is not something that we can do all by ourselves. We need all the support from all the stakeholders that we're working on a day-to-day basis in figuring out these answers, so that the terminology of waste can be redirected to as a resource, so that it can be valorized to its entire potential, and it can really benefit the overall textile supply chain. There are different aspects of another aspect of working in terms of really finishing the circle. So I mean, today in today's aspect, circularity is a buzzword, and anyone and everyone talks about it, right? That we are all really interested on making a circular supply chain. You all talk about circular economy, but when it comes to circular economy, we can maybe break it down into two loops. One loop ensuring the waste in the context of waste management. Of course, in one aspect, you look at that, you ensure that the amount of waste that you're producing is finally ending up to be recycled, so that it's not ending up being a burden to the economy and the atmosphere and the environment and so on. And the second stage, the recycled material is actually making its way back to the supply chain. So there are two different loops to this particular circle, and reverse resources from our side, we are trying to look into the both loops, how we can connect these long-term collaborations and so on and so forth. One of a lot of these activities we try to partake in terms of a lot of global projects that we're doing. One of the notable ones is a project called Circular Fashion Partnership that we did in Bangladesh with 21 brands, BJMEA, and different other stakeholders, some recyclers, some factories, to actually collaborate together, bring everyone to the same platform and see how we can valorize the waste supply chain. So that's mostly about the activities that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, I think I can go on for a long period of time, but yeah, I think I should do justice to the other panelists as well. So thank you.
Sure. No, thank you, Mumit, for giving us all that valuable information. And we actually had Ms. Rubana speak on an earlier fireside chat, and she was previously associated with BMGA. So it's just great to see multiple sort of threads of conversation, hopefully coming together, or that's the kind of attempt that these kind of convenings are hoping to do as next steps. So with that, moving on to Gigi. Gigi, if you could maybe, similar to Mumit, just sort of talk about the work specific to circular textiles that you're doing with NBU in India.
Thanks, Priya. Thanks for having me over. It's always a pleasure to be, on any panel with Andy, because I think, it's about, I like the mix that you bring into perspectives. And I think with respect to what NVU does, so NVU is, social impact building studio. So what we do is we build ventures programmatically. Now in South Asia, India and Bangladesh, what we do is, our strongest program here is the Reweave program, under which we build ventures to close the gaps across the textile value chain. So the way we do it is just not building ventures ad hoc, where we look at one, a problem, and then you build a venture and try to close a gap. But we look at a series of ventures that can actually create systemic change. Like, for example, what we do with respect to the raw material, when you look at manufacturers and brands, right? So when during the production of garments, there's a lot of waste. So that's actually one of our biggest focus under the Reweave program. So what do we do with this waste, right? And India and of course Bangladesh, too, being large production countries for waste, your solution needs to be that large too, to create the kind of, the vision that we have to create systemic change. So with one of our ventures called Upset Textiles, we have partnered with Purify to rejuvenate cotton waste, or to rejuvenate waste. Of course, blends also work. So what we do is, the waste that we use is not considered as waste anymore. Like Mumit was saying, it's a resource, right? But for us, can we get back waste to be raw materials? So, that goes back into the system. And we have been talking to manufacturers and brands, and they are extremely interested in this, because the solution is to address all of their waste. We get a lot of conversation with respect to waste in India, right? And especially in India, you say, hey, you know what? It's very fragmented. Manufacturers and brands don't know what's happening to their waste. And I think the key is to also give that, as Mumit was saying, the transparency and the traceability of the waste. So when we talk to brands and manufacturers, they're like, it's not about taking a few tons of our waste and getting it back into the system, but hey, can you work with all of our waste, right? So that's what Upset Textiles does, is to actually work with partners which can offer these large scale solutions. And of course, the ventures we build are scalable and profitable ventures, which achieve, and impact is key. Now, if you look at Kaloom, another venture of ours, it's a handloom weaving unit. And what we do is we work with recycled yarn to make high-end fabrics, and that takes care of fabric production. Then you also have, of course, Upset Textile works with post-production waste. And then we have on the post-consumer side, we have a lot of ventures in the pipeline that are coming up, like Rent a Towel and collaborations with iDid. We're looking at how we can actually use post-consumer waste to bring in value back. Rent a Towel is a venture which looks at creating circularity within the hospitality industry. How can we use their post-consumer waste to bring it back to them as good as how they would use high-end towels or sheets? And I think, this whole, Cyprian, you're talking about circular economy. I remember 3 years back when, NView was talking about circularity and or circular economy as a whole. And before we actually went into looking at waste, right? I remember people telling us that, hey, we were ahead of the curve. Like, yeah, it's going to come in, but don't you think it's a little too early? But today, if you're not already talking about it or doing something about it, you're already late. This whole conversation on circularity is no more in the CSR departments, but it's in boardrooms. I mean, like Moment said, we can't do this alone. So we're doing it, in collaboration with big brands and manufacturers. And I'm sitting with them in their boardrooms, making sustainability, circular economy, bringing waste to value as part of their very core agenda for the year. So I think, this is a very important thing to be looking at and discussing and seeing how. And I think NView, for what we have been doing for a long time now, is the expertise to build those ventures that close the gaps in the chain. So that's my first take on, coming from what circular economy actually means and what we do as NView.
Great. Thank you so much, Gigi. And I think just sort of tying into some of the pieces that you mentioned about how these solutions are there, and now we need to sort of see how we can expand these solutions. And a piece that even Mumit talked about is how can we effectively provide this awareness and this knowledge to the different service providers out there. I think that ties into my second question that I had, to just understand the role of technology that you're seeing in this ecosystem, right? Whether it is specifically in terms of solutions being provided or in terms of scaling solutions to the different audiences that you work with. So I think all three of you may have different versions of where technology might come in, because it can fit different definitions. So Devyani, curious to hear your thoughts on this, please.
Sure. Just want to check if I'm audible. Because I think there were some issues with my audio earlier. So is this better?
I can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. I think one of the things that technology cuts across circularity, right? You're talking about innovation, and some of it is technical innovation as well. So it's at various levels. I think Gigi and Mumit will touch upon some aspects, but the way I look at, I think Gigi already brought this point out. First is transparency, transparency and traceability. Now that's a huge requirement when you're talking about material flows in a circular value chain, and I think technology will play an extremely important role there. You're looking at a lot of innovations. You're looking at recycling technologies that are coming in, because if we want to increase the rate of recycling, I think we have to increase the technical innovation, and we have to adopt newer technologies. The good thing is that more technologies are available, but they have to probably become more affordable. Perhaps a little more indigenous research is needed on them. Acceptance needs to be higher. I think brands probably need to collaborate with suppliers on how you can adopt some of these. Technology also for sorting, for example, for certain processes, there is talk of, can we look at automation, which is great. But I think a word of caution that I would again like to highlight the point of just transition, that whenever you look at a technology intervention, how do you ensure that, you've looked at livelihoods, that there is requisite skilling, there is requisite alternate livelihoods that are created. So we've seen technology across various levels. We've seen it in innovations that are coming up. We are seeing it in traceability and transparency that's being talked about, and material flows. We are talking about processes that are being looked at. We are looking at more efficient technology when it comes to energy, when it comes to water use. So I think it is definitely a very strong requirement and a game changer when it comes to circular value chains. It's just that we always have to balance that adoption of technology vis-a-vis the impact on people. Sometimes, there is a direct correlation, and it actually creates more job opportunities. It creates new entrepreneurs. It opens up new markets, and technology would also have a role. And I think this was a thought you had. This was a topic you'd wanted to think us about digitization also. That one of the challenges, and I think Gigi and Momit would be better placed to answer this, but a lot of the entrepreneurs who work with waste, their biggest challenge today is that they're not sure how much of it is available. Right. So I think their digitization, their technology would probably play a huge role. And perhaps you look at stakeholder collaboration, you look at municipalities, that you even get an understanding that what is the quantum of waste that is being collected or is available, and enterprises can plan around that. I mean, imagine having a manufacturing outfit and you don't know how much of the raw material is actually available to you. So I think from that perspective, it is extremely important. Thanks.
Thanks, Devyani. And Momit, if I may ask you to come in, specifically around that digitization piece, because I know you had some thoughts about that when we spoke earlier, the role of digitization in kind of moving this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the thing is that when we are talking about circularity, circular economy, possibilities of more visibility and in this waste supply chain, I mean, digitalization of the whole supply chain is an absolute must. Why I think in this perspective, I mean, when we are talking about one or two factories, maybe it is possible, like if we're talking about one or two manufacturers, one or two brands, one or two recyclers, maybe they can make a system internally that will give them visibility. But when we are talking about an industry altogether, that is way too much of a data, and it is absolutely necessary that it needs to be digitally available if we are talking about scaling it up. I mean, when we're talking about taking it to the next level. When it comes to in the existing supply chain, of course, as Gigi and Devyani, both of them were rightly saying, I mean, a recycler expecting to build a large recycling plant in a location without a possibility of getting visibility on how much amount of textile waste, which we are calling waste, but it's a feedstock in the context of a recycler, how much of that is available, and what qualities of waste or feedstock is actually available. Those sort of informations are absolutely crucial for making any sort of or taking this sort of a decision. And the main problem in the current supply chain is, if we in most cases that we have seen that the recyclers, they are currently unaware of which manufacturers their waste is currently generating from, and the manufacturers, they are unaware of where the where their waste is actually going. So it creates a big gap in the whole supply chain. If we see from the recyclers' perspective, they have to undergo a lot of vigorous testing because they are unaware of whether the waste that they're getting from the open market, is it from a proper compliant factory's waste, or is it from a less compliant factory's waste? Is that factory getting a certain level of chemical compliance or whatnot? This sort of visibility is absolutely crucial, and this sort of visibility can be given only when there is a digital footprint of the supply chain. Then it can be very easily identified and the steps can be taken accordingly. Yeah, I think that's mostly from my side. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks. Gigi, if I can also hear, the work that you're doing with Reweave, I know I capture some part of this as well. So if you can, share a bit on that.
Yeah, sure. So like I was telling you, right, for large production countries, like especially in textile, like India and Bangladesh, the issue is big, right? And the solution also has to be big, or if you're bringing it in, it has to be scalable to achieve when we say, especially for us when we talk about systemic change, and that is possible only with tech. So because if you look at a manufacturer and he says, hey, I have 50,000 tons of waste a year, and if you're going to be providing me a solution to take care of all my waste so that I can then understand as an organization where my waste is going, And can some of it come back into, remanufacturing, as you say, as you are saying, then what works? So tech is extremely important in our case to close those gaps. For example, let's take Upset Textiles, which one of the main core essence of it is in its sorting of textile waste, right? The value of waste is in its sorting. Because right now, what happens in most cases is waste is collected as a whole and mostly downcycled. So when we work with partners like Purify or other partners that provide large-scale solution, the key is in its sorting. And how do we actually, work with a manufacturing unit which gives us 50,000 tons of waste per year? How do we work that? And Devyani, to your point of also making sure that automation doesn't really, if that's a point we make about making sure that we're protecting jobs too, like for the waste workers who work in our sorting center, I think the whole aspect of bringing in technology is also about upskilling them. Because say our partners Purify, they have a 75-page book which tells you how to sort for their solution, so that the waste that leaves our sorting center is Purify ready. And the ladies in our sorting center have been trained on that. So there is a use of technology, there is automation, but then there is a level of actually providing them that new skill and a new waste stream to also work with. So I think tech is extremely important if we have to solve this problem, right? Take, for example, reverse resources, as Mo was saying, the tech platform. I mean, I think that's fantastic to be able to, put waste in there and make it to bring the best optimum use of waste. And I think that's key to understand how soon you want to solve this problem. So that's my take on it.
Great. No, thanks, Gigi, definitely. I think we can maybe take a few questions that are coming in through the Q&A before we move on to the second half of the discussion. So Chief, I may request you to read out a couple of those questions, please.
Yep, sure. So the first is, I'll read out the question. And I think Devyani said that she would like to sort of answer that, which is, how can countries learn from each other? Have you seen avenues for resource and knowledge sharing or collaboration?
Yeah, thanks, Sucharita. I did have a chance to look at all the questions. Is it okay if I take a short stab at each one of them? Sorry, I was trying to answer them side by side as well.
Sure,
And
please do.
So I
Please
think
go ahead.
there was a question on biodegradable materials and the space and the transition. So short answer that definitely there are lots of innovations, very interesting ones, very attractive ones. And this also came across in other countries. I did a short study in Kenya and it was very interesting. There was a whole booklet on how innovators had looked at various materials, that could replace some of the traditional materials. Now, what you really need is more acceptance from brands and consumers, because sometimes there are issues with usability of these materials in the same manner as we are used to traditional materials. So I think more R&D, more collaboration, more support to these enterprises, but policies can play a role, right? Because if they can be incentivized, if you can encourage startups which are looking at such materials, I think that would go a long way. But you would always look at brand acceptability, consumer acceptance. Affordability will always be an issue, right? We are still in very price sensitive economies. We do have a group of consumers who are who are giving higher weightage to the sustainable aspects, but I think we still are a fairly price sensitive consumer economy, and that's something we would look at. So I hope that answers the question on biomaterials. In terms of cross region, I think and this is something that I just feel, I've not really seen, but we've been trying to put together a small consortium or a group of stakeholders who are interested across the region, because we can learn from each other's policies. We can learn from each other's good practices. I recall from a conversation we had with a brand that they were quite happy with what was happening in Bangladesh because the government had prohibited certain kind of chemicals, right? So that aligned to their own policy and it made it easier for them to work with their supply chains, as but in contrast in India, they had to impose those restrictions restrictions on the suppliers. So I think how we look at policies, of course, there would be country context. Vietnam, for example, also does a very good job of integrating policies. You know, they have a whole circular economy institute, and they've done a massive exercise on revisiting their policies and introducing circularity and understanding what introducing circularity would mean. So I think there is definitely scope. And that collaboration can also be between innovation, academia, and practitioners, between the industry, right? It can be industry, it can be industry, academia, because there's a lot of work. And I think what will be important in this regional collaboration is really to look at, how do you define what is a narrative for the region? Right, that you understand what the global developments are, but what are those circular economy priorities for your country or your region, and what kind of support also the region would need if you are looking at this transition. You know, if you're talking about energy transition, water transition, these are all expensive propositions, you know, sometimes. Okay, these are, and there would be support, there would be financing that would be needed. And I think if we take the lead on regional collaboration, we tell a much stronger story. I mean, that's my gut feel on that. But we've had opportunities of working with researchers and institutes in other countries from the region. And how can organizations that work with SMEs help to play a role? First of all, just understand circularity. You know, we are also developing a toolkit to help businesses understand, uninitiated businesses, that what does circularity really mean? How can they do a quick and dirty assessment of what are the opportunities of circularity in their operations, right? SMEs will play an extremely important role. Now, they always do in any kind of transition or in any kind of industrial system, right? So you need to really talk to, create that awareness, discover those opportunities, look at programs, get the ecosystem in if you are talking to SMEs. And we've spoken to quite a few SMEs in different clusters, and there's definitely interest, and there is also leadership. There are SMEs who are already taking the lead on it. I think I see a series of questions from Naval, and maybe if I can take a quick stab, I think you had also talked about that we don't need to focus on recycling as much as responsible consumption. Agreed. Circularity does go, but I think we need to look at both aspects. We would continue to generate waste. Eventually, yes, we have to look at reducing the amount of waste. We have to look at the way we consume, and that would also subsume your question of plastic, packaging, material, diapers, etc. Right? Now, I think we went around and changed consumption models. Traditionally, we were very, I wouldn't say frugal, but responsible consumers. We tended to reuse our clothes. We tended to keep them in the loop quite more. But fast fashion, affordable fashion, changing patterns did change those practices. And it will take a lot from brands, from governments to start shifting the consumption patterns. I think we as consumers have that responsibility as well. Social media does allow us the opportunity to be a lot more aware, and every stakeholder has a role, right? Designers can look at that. How do you reuse your clothes? How do you restyle them in a different manner? So yes, we will have to look at responsible consumption, but we will also have to look at the waste that's being generated. How do we look at effectively using it in a much better manner? So I don't think we can work towards a model of saying that we will have absolutely zero waste, but we can work towards a model where we say that no waste is landfilled, or that no waste is left unutilized. So
thanks, Devyani. I'm going
to stop. Yeah.
No, thank you. I'm going to, I see Mumit would like to answer Naval's next question. So go ahead, Mumit, please.
Thanks, Suchrita. So just to again pick up from what Devyani was saying, the idea is basically, the question was how you were advocating, awareing, and ensuring the responsible use by businesses, governments, and people at large. I think it also touches upon the very concept of using less, or trying to be frugal, or trying to use, consume less. Of course, that is the best case scenario. We would all want that. But from transition into the period where we are now, and to that, it's in a very quick amount of time is quite unrealistic, to be frank. we would definitely like to be there, but unfortunately, in today's context, the amount of consumerism and the amount of material and the amount of products are just going higher and higher. So primarily, we have to look at the in the context of the lowest hanging fruit, and in that case, of course, working with governments and policymakers to empower policies that would ensure that at least what is produced, the byproduct of it, which we're generally terming as waste, is being valorized to its best potential. That is actually the lowest hanging fruit that we have to aim for. Of course, eventually we all have to transition into a perspective where we try to consume less. We would all want to be there, but while we go in the embark on that journey, we also have to ensure that whatever we are producing is actually making its way to the waste is making its way to proper recycling solutions, and it is reaching to its complete potential. That is what I wanted to say. I also wanted to touch upon, Sucharita, if I may, on the SME part of the question, because of course, a lot of work that we are doing from reverse resources. Of course, Bangladesh is not the only place where we are currently operational in. We have operations in India, we have operations in Northern Africa, and so on. But Bangladesh being the country where we started our journey, because it has the maximum amount of most recyclable textile waste, if I may say. SMEs does play a very big role in terms of the current economic condition or current supply chain, informal supply chain that has been built. And we definitely have to figure out a way on how to just educate them and bring them from the informal way they're dealing with things to a bit more formality that would eventually improve the quality working conditions of the people working there. And it would also help them to be getting more value for the very important work that they're doing in some cases. So yeah, that would be more. That would be from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Mohammed. Gigi, please go ahead. I was actually going to pose that next question to you, but I think that will be the last question we take at this point in the interest of time. Cypria, let's continue after this, and based on where we land, we can see if we can take a few more questions.
Yeah, so the question asked is, what is the role of larger funder type organizations to catalyze this space when we talk about circular economy? And I think in the very beginning, all of us were talking about collaboration is key. Now for Enview, one of the, the models that we have nailed is that we don't have our own technology. And, it is funds that come in from, a large funder organization like in the Question Post. Like, for example, the work we do with GIZ and the IKEA Foundation is to, close the loop on textile waste. And the thing is that enablers like Enview, right, who can get on the ground, have boots on the ground, are experts in the problem and have worked on solutions which have been successful, that's key. So I think collaboration is extremely important to find the alignment with, even to bring a solution into a market. Like say we brought in Purify in India, we cannot do it by ourselves. So whether you're working with GIZ to make sure that the sorting part of it is set up and and funded, and also if you're working with brands and manufacturers, I think all those things go together to make sure that we achieve the whole goal that we have to close the gaps in circular economy. So I think so if you're talking about large funder organization who can be part of this and catalyze this, is to work with enablers, work with people already on the ground, work with people closer to the solution. And I think that's key.
Thanks, Gigi. Cypria, back to you.
Thanks, Suchi. Thanks, Gigi. And I think that kind of ties into another question that I had, and I also see coming through the chat as well, which is shifting the lens slightly from the funder organizations to other large stakeholders, which is the government, right? So just to kind of curious to hear your thoughts, given the work that you're doing on what the countries, Bangladesh and India are doing to push this conversation. Are you seeing policies at the national level, state level, regional level starting to be implemented? Have they woken up to, start talking about this? Is it impacting the work that you're doing, the SMEs that you're working with, or is it something that's still, at the policy formulation level, not necessarily trickle down? So, just curious to hear your thoughts on that. Maybe Gigi, if you want to go first, and then we can hear from Mohit and Devyani.
That's a very interesting question, because I'll tell you, through the 3 years of being in circularity when it comes to textiles, at one point of time, we were talking to people separately. But I remember sitting, in probably before COVID, sitting in the Department of Handloom and Textiles in Karnataka, Bangalore, and they actually bringing brands together to talk about, hey, how can we get circular on waste? So this conversation is happening. And I can already see the collaboration, or it's very strong on that collaboration where, even of course, because I was with the government of Karnataka on this when at the handloom department, textile and handloom department, it is an answer that they needed to give during their reports to see what, large manufacturers were doing about their waste. And then they brought in brands to the table, and there was enablers like us, Enview, who can make sure that we can bring those solutions to the ground and make it work. So I was
thanks. Maybe if I can
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No,
So
please finish your thought.
I'm saying this is, for me, I can see those changes happening. But of course, I mean, there are a lot of challenges, no doubt, but I can tell you that the ball is rolling.
Thanks. Maybe if I can hear from Devyani, has your experience been similar? Do you have a different take on this?
So there's definitely development happening towards that. So if I just put it quickly into context, the draft resource efficiency policy was, I think put out in 2019. So there is definitely a focus on circularity, and there was an encouragement for different industrial ministries, right? Sectoral ministries to look at that as well. If we look at the context of Ministry of Textile and Apparel, there is definitely a lot of focus on resource efficiency. They're trying to understand, how they can support circularity. They do have, a distinct focus, somebody who's now responsible on reporting on circularity and sustainability. And I know there's thought about how to get the regional offices involved as well, and what sort of capacities need to be created there. As Gigi said, I think there's still a lot more to be done. But there is definitely focus, even if we look at Ministry of MSME, right? Now, there's a lot they want to do on sustainability. I think there is perhaps a need to tie it under the umbrella of circularity, because sometimes you might see it under different aspects, right? You might see certain states doing better on water, right? Or if you look at certain industrial policies, for example, in the state of Gujarat, which has cleaner production centers, right? And a lot of support for SMEs. So there is a lot happening. There's definitely more scope, but I think if you look at overall circularity, there perhaps could be a way to see that how some of these different streams that are working, can we pull them together? So good news, definitely, but a long way to go. Thanks.
Thanks. And Moment, if you can share your experiences, working in Bangladesh.
Yeah, thanks, Sapriya. So in the context of Bangladesh, of course, as I was saying earlier, that there is this project that we did last year, the first phase of the project called Circular Fashion Partnership Project. As a part of that project, we did engage with a good group of government stakeholders like Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Department of Environment, Bangladesh Export Processing Zone Authority chairman was there. I think the two municipality, Dhaka North and Dhaka South, both representatives were there. And primarily we were discussing, the thing is that in the context of Bangladesh, of course, the discussion have just started. We are, I don't believe in the perspective of getting policies. Of course, BJME has now built circularity as a part of one of the, in their new logo, they have introduced circularity as a building block that they're really focusing in. So there are discussions. Earlier there were no discussions, but now we see that their situation is actually improving, and there are discussions getting evolved, and there are people becoming aware of the immense potential there is. And it is largely contributed by a lot of brands, because now a lot of brands, they also have targets, and they have their options, and they have opportunities, and they're also focusing a lot on this. And that is getting to the policymakers, and that is getting also reaching to the manufacturers, and everyone is working in that perspective and in that area. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much. I think, yes, definitely. I think one of the questions that I think a lot of you alluded to in this point was that conversation between the global north, the major big brands that have value chains that are operating out of the South Asian, Southeast Asian regions, right? So how are the conversations that they're having, and the general awareness that the society there is building about circular economy, circular textiles? What does that mean when it's translating to work on the ground that you're doing? Maybe slightly shifting gears, I think one last question that I had for you in the interest of time, and we can pause to take a few more questions after that, was just to kind of understand, I think statistically speaking, we know that a lot of women are engaged in this particular sector, right? Working with textiles, working in garment, in value chains. So just curious to sort of understand that intersection of gender and circular textiles. What are opportunities you're seeing for women? I know, Gigi, you do great work with that all-women sorting center, but at the same time, also challenges that we're seeing while we're working when we're talking about the just transition piece that Devyani sort of shed light on. So maybe, Gigi, if you could start us off and then hear from the others as well.
When we started, when we were initiating our sorting center, it was during COVID 2020, and COVID was in its second phase, and a lot of women were displaced. And most of these were, the background of these women were, they were waste workers, but not necessarily in textiles. So it was so we didn't in the beginning. It wasn't about, hey, we only wanted women, but the number of people who came to seek this job of waste sorting were women, and women who, who initially were just picking up plastic or paper waste, but then could be trained to actually do a very technical sorting, right? And like I was telling you, a 75-page sorting manual, which they right now are so good at. Now, I would think that women here have proven to be very process-oriented, very, it's very intricate when it comes to their skills. But also during COVID, they were probably one of being displaced. It was survival mode. So most of the time, it's these women out there who are seeking these jobs and, were available to be doing this. And we see these numbers growing. Also that they have seen that there's value in doing jobs like this, right? So it's not just anymore that I just want a job to survive, but hey, I want a job that will upskill me. I want a job that will bring the standard of living up. I want a job that my children can go to better schools. I want a job because, my economic conditions are not best at home. And I think we've seen a large number of women actually taking that responsibility up and working here. And I've seen that in this industry. So, that's how we're so proud that our sorting center today has a team of women who I would call as experts on the ground when it comes to textile waste, the sorting of textile waste. So that is something that I see, you will find more and more women, coming into this because they're so good at it naturally.
Great, thank you so much for that. And as the man in the room, Mumit, and the entrepreneur person wearing the entrepreneurial hat, if I could sort of request you to respond to the question before I go to Devyani.
Yeah, thanks, Priya. So the idea is, of course, in Bangladesh, if you're talking about post-industrial textile sorting centers, it's mostly women who are working on the sorting part of it. Of course, a lot of men are involved when it comes to the logistics part. Carrying waste from the factories to the sorting centers and taking it back. So primarily the sorting activity, which is a key activity that is done primarily by women. What we have identified and what we have seen is primarily the stakeholders that we are working with, because we also work with waste handlers who help us sort the waste based on the requirement of the recyclers. Those companies are comparatively doing better in terms of compliant practices. And they're motivated because they're actually being recognized better. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to build this primary level of code of conduct, let's just say, with support of multiple recyclers and as a part of a project, so that code of conduct is primarily required by the recycler to work with a sorting center or a waste handler per se, so that will eventually improve the quality of work and working conditions for women who are mostly occupying the larger working force when it comes to textile waste sorting in the context of industrial textile waste. Of course, there are also aspects when we're talking about getting better practices, of course, there need to be like a reward system of companies who are actually partaking in these activities. So we are also working in highlighting the better companies who are actually improving their current practices, and we are trying to rank them in terms of like gold, silver, bronze, so that at least you can people are incentivized to actually reach to a better level of compliance, and that's how this whole situation can be improved further on. So yeah, that's primarily what I think, or how I think that these things can be done. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Mohit. And Devyani, if I may come to you, and if you can
So,
share your thoughts.
I think echoing thoughts that Gigi and Mumit have already shared, I think just a couple of things. We've also seen that when you've looked at enterprises, there are new job opportunities also. So there's upskilling, but there's also creating jobs. If you're working with waste, upcycling, artisans, who've been left out of the loop, there's an opportunity actually to bring them back into the value chains. So that's something that we have seen in our conversations with various entrepreneurs, right? That they work with women artisans. But I think just what we are seeing is that circularity, when it started, right, was a lot of focus on the environment. But now you talk of a social circular economy, circularity 2.0, that you really can't delink the two. So as you look to move to a truly circular value chain, not only are you looking at your environmental impact, but you're looking at your social practices. And I think Gigi touched upon this, the quality of work, decent work. And that is something that all aspire to. And there is an opportunity to look at how do you create much better working conditions, wages, upskilling, better potential, higher value jobs. And that is what circularity can bring as well. And given that the sector naturally employs a huge number of women, I think if we look at a proper social circular economy, you're looking at a lot of these benefits percolating to them. And indirectly also a lot of the impact of the environmental, is on marginalized communities and on women. And if you start addressing some of them, that's the longer route, but you start making it better for them.
Thanks, Devyani. I'm going to jump in here because I think that's a really nice segue into one final question that I had from my side, right? While Cypriya launches the poll, which is, and that's one of the role of a network like ours, right? Which is questioning the status quo. So you talked about things that come naturally to women, right? And how the men did other things like logistics. So my question really, both to Gigi and Mumit first maybe, is, can we not change that around? Aren't we, is there a way where we can move from what comes naturally to other things that may actually come naturally that we haven't discovered yet? So, can women not do logistics, or can they not do something else? So as the entrepreneur working with many of these and answering the hard questions, you can say it's easy to sit on the side and ask, but also as the entrepreneur support organization, Gigi at NView, what would your response to that be?
If you came to our sorting center and you would see only women actually carrying 250 kgs and baling it by hand before we got the machine, right, to bale. So honestly, if you came into the sorting center and see the kind of work, traditionally, if I have to think back about all these ways and what it takes to be among there, I would probably see a lot of men doing that, right? Moving these bales, trying to find the exact fit. Can 250 kgs fit? How many of it can fit into a 20-foot container? Who's doing all that? It's the women at the sorting center. So I think that, over the year, they have proved that it's not about a man's job or a woman's job, but I'm capable of running this. I'm capable of doing logistics. I'm capable of packaging. I'm capable of, speaking to outside vendors to bring in the waste. I'm capable of handling transportation on the ground. So I think at least in NView, that's about empowering and providing that upskilling. And I think women have brilliantly grown and, learning new things. I think I would like to say it comes very easy to them if the opportunity, if that safe working environment, if, there are enablers like us present to make that happen. Those are my thoughts.
Mumit?
Yeah, I mean, of course, primarily there's no, personally, I don't think that there is anything defined, gender defined job. Let's just say that this is a man's job or this is a woman's job in particular. It entirely depends on the kind of skill set a person possesses. Of course, in the context of today's scenario, if I say that, quote the reality, in most cases in the sorting centers, the heavy liftings are generally done by men. But of course, as echoing to what Gigi was saying, that if proper conditions can be involved, can be ensured and implemented, if there are proper working conditions, if there are proper, trainings provided, there are a multitude of things that anyone can do in the context of not just men or women. Anyone can do, and it will generally improve the quality of life for everyone. And that is the main thing. I will just finish with a very quick example of one of our sorting centers. Primarily, they didn't even know how to operate a computer, because a computer is of course required for you to input data on, as we are an online platform. From there, they have come to a level of dealing more than 100 tons of waste and inputting, giving everything on, giving all data input and everything. So it's just about a journey. There has to be someone trying to mentor. There has to be someone supporting people, and then eventually anything and everything is a possibility. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Devyani, just checking if there's anything you want to add, respond to that, or I can move into closing out since we're
No,
1
I
minute
think
over time.
similar points, and it's just really, so I don't think it's the women who's holding themselves back, but you really need to look at the ecosystem around. And there are companies, who've gone and done this. So I think a lot of responsibility also is with the manufacturers, with the brands, to promote the women. And this is from another sector we heard.
Actually, I think we lost Devyani, so let's close
Think
out.
so. Yes. All right. Okay, we're 2 minutes over time. So thank you so much, everyone who joined. If you see in chat, you have the link to the next session, which will be a speed networking, optional speed networking for those who are interested. So also welcome the panelists to join us in case that's of interest. Would love for you to meet the others in the room as well. But definitely before closing out, sorry, Devyani, I think we lost you there for a bit. So just wrapping up, but happy to hear more thoughts and send that across in a follow-up email. But thank you, Gigi. Thank you, Devyani. Thank you, Momit, for your valuable time on designing this panel as well as participating. I think some truly great insights shared. I hope this is the beginning of the conversation, like we said, about active resource sharing, knowledge sharing, cross-border collaboration. Hopefully we can move towards that, by the time we put this together next year around, and happy to sort of, help spark these conversations off from Andy's end as well. So once again, thank you so much. And we will be getting the responses to the ones who we did not get a chance to get to. We'll get back to you post-session in our follow-up emails. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.